Good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing?
You feeling better?
Yeah, yeah. I uh I did a silly.
Oh no.
Well, I was over at Valley and I ended up hitting the dirt, fell off a step,
Uh-oh.
stumbling around in the dark one night. So yeah. So got a little banged up.
Self-inflicted wound, huh?
Yes, yes. Not not my, most brilliant and shining moment. To say the least. So,
Never had anything like that before in my life.
well, good for you. I'm glad.
If you believe that, I got some mountain land in South Florida for sale.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. But no, seriously, it's yeah. Yeah, it's like I don't recommend it. You know. For whatever reason, I just don't bounce off the ground the way I used to.
Yeah, well, hey, it happens to all of us.
Yeah. But yeah, that was kind of not fun. And it kind of slowed the whole week down. I still got a lot done. Even though I was kind of hurting, I tore what three walls out and
Oh, okay.
and reframed one. Um, got the porch opened up, so I still got quite a bit done, but when I got back here, it's just like okay, yeah. Regardless, I've got to slow down a little bit, so I took a couple of days just to recover.
I don't blame you for that.
Well, yeah, it was one of those, yeah, we're not really going to give you a choice anyway. So let me lower that. There we go. Now I actually show up on the screen. Wow.
Yeah.
Get the right. Yeah, I know. You can see me and everything. Wow. Went painting last night over at Shane McDonald.
I saw your post on Facebook this morning.
Yeah. Did you recognize the model?
You said Sarah.
Yeah.
She was the one from 2 weeks ago on Friday, right?
Not. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I thought, I recognize the name. Sarah, but there's lots of Sarahs out there. So
there's more than one. Yes, I know. But anyhow, so I see Claudia Lang Pitts is here, and Naomi's here. Let's see. The question is, are they really here, or are they just kind of hanging out there? Let's see. That's nice. Telling me to start my class, and I already did. Okay. Huh. All right. Anyway.
I've been working on Grace this morning.
You have?
Mm-hmm. I'll send her to you so we can take a look at her tomorrow.
Very good. Look forward to that. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't talked to her since then. I was going to try to maybe get her out again. She's getting ready to start a job.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so she won't be available a lot of times during the week. So I was thinking about trying to get her out one more time.
Yeah.
Maybe for a Friday drawing class. So, but we'll see how that goes.
We got to work on her facial expression a little bit, so that she the pictures that you had and the pictures that I have of her, she's got kind of a sour look on her face, and she's a pretty lady, but
she is, yeah. Let's see, we have somebody connected by iPhone. I don't know who that is. Hi, iPhone, whoever you are. Is that Eloise?
Can you hear
Veronica.
me? Yes. Good morning.
Oh, okay. Yeah. How you doing, Veronica?
Well, I would be better when my AC gets installed, but we don't even know when it's coming.
Oh
No.
dear.
Oh,
It's a bad time for that to happen.
Yeah. So are you still over at? I think you said you were going over to some friends to.
Yes, I'm still here. They all are not working from home today, so it's easier for me to come in.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. Well, I'm glad you could make it.
Me too.
So yeah, you've been missed. So.
And I've missed the class. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, we've had a lot going on here. So.
And how are you? How is everyone actually?
Well, you are aware that Elon passed away, right?
Yes. My condolences. I wanted to send a card.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have. I think Avatel might have an address or something if you wanted to do that.
I
Okay.
went online and left a message for the funeral service. They had you could leave messages. So I went right online and did that.
Okay.
I forgot what it was. Did I write that down?
Well,
Anyway, if you can query it online, and if you want to leave a message for the family, you can do so right online with the funeral arranger. But they have a obituary notice.
Okay. Thank you.
okay. So let's see. Now my Fulton County phone is ringing. Hang on one second. Let me go find out what that's about. Oh, okay. All right. For those of you who don't know, by the way, today is the beginning of registration. Okay. So if you want to register for any of the on-site classes, this week would be the time to do it. Just send me an email or a text. Please don't call me. Okay. Because I got classes and things going on. And like this person who just called me, I'm sure I know why she called me. So at any rate, just send me a text or an email, and I'll get you on the list, and I'll respond to it so you'll know that you're in the class or what the situation is. Okay. All right. How are you doing, Miss Claudia?
I'm doing great. Thank you for asking.
Okay. Just to let you know, your painting got to the museum safely. They greatly appreciate your loaning them that, and it will be in the front gallery.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's one of the first things you'll see up on
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think some of the family will be interested in going to the opening reception
Yeah, and that is on July the 9th. Okay.
tonight. So I will be there. I've changed my travel arrangements so that I'll be coming in on the 8th, which is my birthday. So.
Ooh-wee. Okay. All right. Well, we'll have lots of reasons to celebrate then. Okay.
Yeah, that is true. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're going to get this thing rolling finally. Okay. So today I got a couple different artists that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to start off with a particular artist. You may have heard his name. His name is William Alphonse Bouguereau. Has anybody familiar with his work?
I am.
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Well, you need to be. Okay. Now I'm going to play a video, and this is a young man who produced this video, and he's talking about, well, a lot of things that we've talked about before about why classical and representational art kind of went through a phase where it almost disappeared, and a lot of these artists who were exceptionally good artists like Sargent, Bow, Bouguereau, why they were kind of erased from history for a while. And I don't agree with everything he says, but it's good to listen to, and he's got a kind of a compelling viewpoint on this. Okay, and it's kind of long. It's about 59 minutes long. Okay, but it's well worth watching, and it will enlighten you and answer a lot of questions for you. Okay, so I'm going to share that, and we'll get started. So I hope you have a cup of coffee.
We do.
Okay, good. So away we go. Everybody see a big black screen?
Yes.
There you go. Make sure we're all on the same page here.
Who is William Bouguereau? The most classically trained realist artist, he would have to be considered the progenitor of artistic excellence. With the resurgence of classical realism in schools and ateliers such as the Grand Central Academy and the Florence Academy of Art, have all incorporated the excellence and legacy of Bouguereau standards in drawing and painting, bring back a classical approach to realism now in the 21st century. Bouguereau unquestionably is one of history's greatest artistic geniuses of the 19th century. However, yet over the last century, his work and reputation and unparalleled accomplishments have undergone a relentless slander of incredible proportions with the art establishment. It was reported in the 1900 Universal Exhibition in Paris. A reporter asked Edgar Degas and Claude Monet who they thought would be one of the greatest artists in the year 2000. They emphatically said William Bouguereau. But why would these artists and their followers proceed with such a smear campaign on such an important artist such as Bouguereau, to destroy his reputation and to disregard him and his work as unimportant? He was criticized by a new generation of progressive artists, writers, and critics who felt that their motivation was to rebel and challenge the art establishment, which in large part fostered by the French government. And what they saw in artists like Bouguereau was, in their minds, what was wrong with the official French classical academic art world in Paris. It was said that young artists such as Edgar Degas, being the arbiter of the new order in painting, would use the expression Bouguerized to describe a classical style which, of course, he vehemently detested. The aspiring Impressionists were looking for a new way to paint, a way that they could catapult themselves and their art into fame, fortune. Ironically, most of the same aspiring Impressionists who railed against Bouguereau were some of his students. After months of trying, Bouguereau said to his student, "You simply do not know perspective." That student happened to be Claude Monet. Clearly, this situation between instructor and pupil at the Beaux-Arts school was routine and obviously was a main reason why the young Impressionists felt they couldn't meet the high standards of the École des Beaux-Arts. Bouguereau in his own time was considered a genius. His mastery of painting, joined with his well-thought-out classical compositions, was unparalleled by most of his academic contemporaries. So the question is, why was such a strong concerted effort to mock and excoriate such an artist from history? Why, from the year 1900 to the late 20th century, close to a century, that not a mention of him or his work was included in art history books of the late 19th century? We also have to understand a very important component here. Avant-garde artists such as Moreau and Picasso's motivation to remove the higher classical standards was simply because they did not want to be judged or compared to these academic artists and their standards. Let's compare what happened to Bouguereau and the other academic artists to classical music. What if you were a music major and you were studying the classical composers and the names of Mozart, Chopin, Haydn were never mentioned, their music never played, simply because your music professors were being persuaded by a small group of contemporary musicians, let's say like Justin Bieber or Lady Gaga, who felt that Mozart, Chopin, and Haydn's music was irrelevant, and those artists would be stricken from classical music history. However, if you heard that music and its beauty, you would feel that something was seriously wrong. Unfortunately, that is what happened to the academic artists in the latter part of the 19th century. Who else, other than the progressive-minded artists and a press who were excited to write about the art of the new, would conspire to destroy these artists and their reputations? Well, let's look a bit deeper. Who would really benefit from this major change in the art world? If you guessed the gallery owners and the museums, you'd be 100% correct. Let me share with you my first experience of seeing Bouguereau's work in 1985. I was attending the Art Students League of New York at night, and by day working as a commercial artist in an advertising agency. My goal was to learn to paint and draw in a traditional style so that I could hone my skills to work as an illustrator. I found Jack Ferragasso's class to be one place where I could learn a strong drawing and painting technique that was developed by the great instructor of realism, Frank J. Riley. One evening, I noticed the instructor and other students gathered around looking at a book. That book was to be my Bible. It was the only book at the time that was published to accompany Bouguereau's first international retrospective show, first at the Musée du Palais in Paris, the Montreal Museum, and lastly, the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford. There was one copy left on sale at the Art Students League art store, and I used my week's dinner money to buy it. Looking at this book, I was amazed by the painted finishes of his work, the compositions, the drawings. And the next day, during my lunch hour, I ran up to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to see this painting, The Breton Children. It was one of Bouguereau's paintings in permanent collection. All I remember seeing in that area of the museums were the Impressionists, Monet's, Degas, and Mary Cassatt paintings. I had a Nikon camera and took photographs of the children's feet, hands, and if I were 3 feet taller, I would have photographed the faces in detail. My only question was, why was there only one painting? That's when I spoke with my instructor, and he told me that the museum's vaults are filled with paintings that are never shown. And to my surprise, after Bouguereau's major retrospective show the following year, one more of Bouguereau's painting was included in the permanent exhibit. It is this beautiful painting titled The Proposal. When observed face to face, I could see that his paintings are truly windows into a frozen scene in time with a natural realism I've never seen before. Again, who was William Bouguereau? Now equipped with my newly purchased William Bouguereau book, which today is held together by packing tape, I can really get to know this artist and his amazing talents. In 1850, Bouguereau won the prestigious Prix de Rome competition at age 25, and also winning just about every award imaginable in his day. He went on later in life to be the president of the École des Beaux-Arts, the most important art school in France. Also the head of the French Salon and president of the Legion of Honor. He was held in high esteem by the academic masters, painters such as Tissot, John Waterhouse, Cabanel, Alma Tademich, just to name a few. However, was excoriated, despised again by the avant-garde artists. The 19th century allowed for freedom and democracy. It was a time of breakthroughs, enlightenment, and thinking. Never was there a time in art that experienced more innovations and new techniques within a half century. Here's a quote from Bouguereau. "This is one of mankind's greatest achievements, one of the defining characteristics of advanced civilization that makes us so unique, so sophisticated, and so special. We are talking about the great art of drawing, painting, and sculpture, through which it's possible to express our shared humanity, including all of the universal, profound, complex, and subtle emotions of what it means to be human. Our hopes and dreams, our fears and fantasies, jealousy, joy, grief, loneliness, expectations, insecurities, intrigue, compassion, and betrayal, all folded into our art." This was a quote from the late 1800s, and this was the ideal followed by the great art masters. This is exactly what the followers of Impressionism, Neo-Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Futurism, Modernism decided was uncreative, confining, and sentimental, to quote Picasso. We need to understand that it wasn't only Impressionism in the 19th century, from 1850 to 1900, but because of this despicable example of biased, prejudicial propaganda being passed off as art education and art history, we don't know much about these academic artists. Monet claimed that the works of the classical masters were obsessed with technique, empty of storytelling, mostly considered to be worthless. In other words, the avant-garde didn't just attack the academic artist, they attacked art itself. Renoir said, "All art from the classical artist is determined to be without value. The ideals of these classical artists and what they considered to be the communion of our common humanity is banished from the entire field." From the art schools, museums, this negativity towards academic art was all supported by journalistic art critics who were held hostage by the same anti-academic propaganda, and it was all paid for by a growing group of dealers, especially Paul Duran, who bankrolled the Impressionist movement. If it weren't for his money, the Impressionist movement would have come to a halt. The dealers were making untold fortunes by hiring spin doctors, writers, to justify their new art products that they could be produced in minutes and hours instead of months and years. The spin was that the new art was not as what came before, but better. Bouguereau was incredibly productive. In his prime, he could paint 16 to 18 important paintings each year, of which would be sold before they were finished. His dealer, Jean Goupil, who was Van Gogh's uncle, had to wait for these classical artists to finish their paintings. However, Jean Goupil had to wait long periods of time to sell these academic works. Now, any good businessman knows if you have 10 of something, but you can sell 200, you better go out and find the 190 so you can meet the demand and, of course, maximize your profit. The art dealers were the ones who created the direction of art, and their advertising dollars made sure the press paid the bill. So the dealers created artists and art forms so supply could keep up with demand. Clearly, the modernists saw this and created a solution. Because of the dealers like Duran, they welcomed this with open arms. The Academy and Salon fell into disrepute by the avant-garde artists who were emerging and whose work was not hailed by the Salon. However, the emperor had created the Salon Réfugié. Bouguereau painted 826 paintings in his lifetime. 75% were master works of art of the highest order. The rest also master level. However, it was only 826 paintings. Monet painted 3,700 paintings. Renoir painted 2,600 paintings. Degas 1,800. But it was Pablo Picasso who had them all beat at 180,000 paintings. In the 1960s and 70s, just about every self-respecting art collector had their own Picasso. It was even said that Picasso would go out to a restaurant and pay for his meal with a signed doodle done on a napkin. By the 1940s, nearly all the museums around the world would have taken down the Bouguereaus at the request of Miro, Matisse, Kandinsky, and Picasso. And these master paintings would be put into attics, basements, and storerooms where they were uncared for. They would stay in these places for the next 70 years. And to add insult to injury, most of these master paintings would be sold off at bargain basement prices. Here are some slanderous inaccuracies to have been said about Bouguereau, which again is more propaganda. The most dominant criticism of his work was petty sentimentality, a quote from Pablo Picasso. Most modernist painters would consider their work as full of emotion. Is it any less emotional because Bouguereau, like very few artists, could paint human sentiment flawlessly and with such poetic brilliance? Bouguereau and other classical artists of the 19th century exhibited a deep, abiding respect for humanity, along with human feelings and a respect of our minds, our spirits, for reason and love, beauty, grace, and truth. These are words these classical artists use and reflected in their work. Bouguereau was not only loved by the general populace, he was also adored and revered by other contemporary giants like Henry James, Charles Dickens, Frédéric Chopin, who was a huge collector of Bouguereau's art. Are we to believe that these recognized geniuses in their own field had such bad taste in judgment? Another major criticism by Picasso was that Bouguereau and other academic artists were not relevant to their time, and that they only copied styles from earlier times. This argument was without a shred of truth. Bouguereau was born in 1825, shortly after the American and French Revolution, and these upheavals were the most tangible results of the new ideas that were generated by this Enlightenment movement, whereas earlier centuries have been controlled by the ideals of religion or monarchs ruling by divine right. Instead of religious paintings, illustrations of historical events and portraits of aristocracy and nobility that dominated the 15th, 16th, and 17th and 18th century. With these new democratic philosophies came an interest and respect for all of mankind. That's what Bouguereau was painting. Liberté, fraternité, égalité was the call of the French. The Americans said all men are created equal. These words perfectly sum up the new philosophical and sociological advances of Western civilization that occurred in the latter part of the 18th century, which was now being popularized by the 19th century. And it's no coincidence that the greatest works of art of the 19th century were created to that way of thinking. Here's a quote by Fred Ross of the Art Renewal Center. And with these changing ideas, art changed, generating many new groups and styles. Bouguereau, in much of his work, used peasants and gypsies for his subject matter. He chose society's lowest to exalt all mankind to the highest. For if we can appreciate the value of the peasants and gypsies, we certainly must be all worthwhile. Bouguereau also celebrated humanity's culture in his painting. as seen in his paintings of mythological scenes such as nymphs, cupids, angels, scenes from literature as well as biblical themes. And these wholly original compositions are handled with an emotional force that is second to none. All are full-blown masterpieces. As for his technical accomplishments, there are no words to describe its perfection. It was the artist's goal and creed to show humanity as beautifully real and ideal as possible, encouraging them to strive for these ideals. Here's a story that I share with my students from time to time. Heading up to see friends in New Hampshire, my wife and I took a detour to the Sterling Clark Institute to see Bouguereau's masterpiece, Nymphs and Satyr. It was a painting I've always wanted to see, and I was about to experience it for the first time. Walking into the room, as the expression goes, I was utterly gobsmacked. The figures were painted so lifelike you could swear that they were breathing. Bouguereau's attention to the humanity shows the figures and the scenes frozen in time. If we look at the Nymph and Satyr painting, Bouguereau paints the figures not in three-quarter lighting, but in a lighting that is ambient and diffused. You can feel the nymphs move back in a natural mist. The myriads of greens as the foliage are intertwined with the flesh tones to create a wonderful harmony within the figures. The contours of the figures are flawless. His drawing ability is truly in a class by itself. We also need to understand that the faces of these models were also idealized, but the natural integrity of their forms are not only anatomically correct, but they transcend the Greek-Roman ideal beyond itself. After about an hour viewing this painting, I went to see the other paintings in the museum, but was drawn back to take a closer look. I asked myself, what was it about this painting that affected me so much? So on my return, I went back to my Bouguereau book, and I read about what Bouguereau did to create such a painting. What was his working method? At the end of a painting day, Bouguereau would start sketches based on themes he had read about or had on his mind to visualize. Many sketches would follow, such as this one. Here are some images to help illustrate how he composed and conceptualized his final paintings. It was the academic standard. Here we see the thought process of what he needed to achieve his final paintings. After general composition was determined, he would then start the studies of the figures, posing models that would ultimately be the figures he would then paint from life. Numerous changes would be made in gesture of the figures until they will work together as a whole. Rhythm of line within the composition was one of the classical ideals that he followed faithfully. Then, once the composition was defined in line, it was now time to study the form, light and shadow. Here we see a painted study showing the composition as it would appear in the final painting. This, however, is in black and white, but Bouguereau would normally paint these in full color. What was his painting process? How did he paint these life-size figures so perfectly and so lifelike? Bouguereau perfected a technique in painting known as glazing. Because of his studies at the Prix de Rome, you would have remembered this quote from Titian, where he said, 40 glazes are still not enough to finish a painting. Bouguereau's early style was more in the line of the French classical technique he learned from Francois-Edward Picot, which incorporated wet into wet painting. It was said that Bouguereau would paint an entire figure wet into wet. This is a form of painting the artist would build form by placing different values and colors close together, all the while with wet paint to create the illusion of form turning in space. Soft transitional blending happened predominantly at this stage. Now, Bouguereau's technique would be after painting a full life-size figure wet into wet, he would then take a palette knife and carefully scrape away the thicker paints. Once this was done with a soft sable brush, he would begin to blend the remaining paint on the surface. This stage would set him up for his glazing applications. It was said that he could paint a life-size nude figure to an amazing finish in only 7 days. Yet the innovations in 19th century painting were not extended to Bouguereau. Edgar Degas was reported as saying that Bouguereau's work lacked innovation, but this was clearly an unfounded bias against him. It was also said that the classical academic's art was irrelevant and lacked social interaction, but again, this couldn't be further from the truth. Bouguereau had a deep respect for humanity, and the message in his paintings is that mankind is good, life is good. Unspoken is the moral message that all people are worthy of love and respect, and that it's society's duty, as well as the duty of each individual, to nurture our children and care for the poor and downtrodden, affirming that each individual is unique and valuable. So not only was it untrue that he was irrelevant, the exact opposite was true. He and many academic artists were on the cutting edge of changes that were occurring in Western civilization. However, the avant-garde painters would not accept changes made by what they perceived to be old, worn-out theories of painting that had seen their day. But it was Bouguereau's glazing techniques that these new age artists could not comprehend its mastery of creating lifelike form. Not only could Bouguereau's uncanny ability to create the illusion of living, energetic figures, along with a subtle interplay of human relations, he captured the very soul and spirit of his subjects, much like Rembrandt did. It was said that Rembrandt captured the soul of age, whereas Bouguereau captured the soul of youth. His figures come to life like no artist before or since achieved. He didn't just paint flesh better, he captured the most subtle texture, tender nuance of personality and mood. Recently, Bouguereau has been described by art critics such as this: he masterfully brought together the elements of most accurate drawing, subtle coloration and perspective, sensitive modeling, and brilliant conceived compositions. He never took shortcuts in his work, was never busy. There are never unnecessary elements strewn about. Landscape is rendered just enough not to take the focus off the figures. All parameters work in harmony to reinforce this poetic and emotional thrust of each subject and theme. And to achieve this, he developed his own idiosyncratic techniques, often creating new methods on the spot to solve painting problems. There have been numerous analytical dissertations written, a number of scholars trying to dissect Bouguereau and how he created his unique magic. Another attack on Bouguereau and his character from his critics was that he only painted for the bourgeoisie, middle class, just to get rich. This is completely false because Bouguereau didn't need to take on commission work or capitulate his work to a specific group just to be more marketable. He simply painted what he believed in and what he loved. He worked in his studio 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, much like Michelangelo. Bouguereau writes in 1870, "Each day I go into my studio full of joy. In the evening, when I'm obligated to stop because of darkness, I scarcely can't wait for the morning to come. My work is not only a pleasure, but it's become a necessity. No matter how many things I have in my life, and if I cannot give myself to my painting, I am miserable." His fame was so great, his dealer, Jean Goupil, was able to charge $10,000 for a single canvas, which is equivalent to $3 million today. His paintings were eagerly acquired by the wealthy, the Mellons, Vanderbilts, Carnegies, Rockefort, who also bought Renoir, Matisse, Picasso, and Gauguin. Were they selling out their paintings just to be rich? The fact that it's most often the wealthy who collect art, rather than using that fact to condemn the artist who is making the money off of them. It should be the basis of praise for those collectors who recognize and help support their genius. Certainly, Picasso was far wealthier when he died than was Bouguereau at the time of his death. Lastly, the myth that Bouguereau stopped the Impressionists from showing at the Salon and at the Academy was completely unfounded and fueled by jealousy. In their youth, Monet, Manet, Renoir, and Degas all studied under these great academic professors, and they were the ones who left their classes because they didn't want to be measured by them. When Bouguereau also told Matisse, "You don't know perspective," Matisse dropped the class. Monet arrogantly said, "The masters have nothing to teach me." Some students actually caused problems. From the start, the benevolent master tried to encourage Matisse, but would never let him move past the drawing segment. So Matisse got frustrated and moved to another instructor who was more progressive. In addition to every salon from 1873 forward, there were always a few impressionists showing their paintings. Only a few in a typical salon show in 1870. Out of 200 artists, there were only 10 impressionists, but they wanted a higher percentage of their work shown. Renoir was accepted into every salon show he applied for, but because of his respect for Monet in the beginning, he didn't show. Later, after Renoir left the Impressionist movement, he began to show his work. Degas didn't want to be judged, and he also persuaded Mary Cassatt not to show in the salon as well. In addition, every opportunity that they had, this new wave would criticize the skill and the style of the academic masters. They would mock him behind his back. They went as far to take newspaper articles out, which was probably not a good idea since Bouguereau was the president of the salon and held the most prestigious position at the École des Beaux-Arts. And he could simply refuse anyone he wished. More importantly, it was Bouguereau who single-handedly used his place of influence to open the Beaux-Arts School and the Académie Julian to women. Prior to Bouguereau, women were not allowed to study at these schools. And sadly, it was a gift that he was not there to see the successful assault on traditional art, which turned the entire art world upside down for the decade that followed his death. Let's take a closer look at this incredible artist's life. William Adolphe Bouguereau was born on the 30th of November, 1825, the second son of Theo and Marie Magritte. His father ran a wine store, but the business only eked out a living. Madame Bouguereau gave birth to a daughter the following year in March, Marie Adelaide, who they nicknamed Hannah. The young Bouguereau was enrolled in a local school, and already his classmates were talking about his innate natural ability to draw. Since his father's business never thrived, there were constant quarrels which compounded their difficulties. Their lack of family finances, which puts them in dire straits, the young couple had to eventually send their children off to live with relatives. William went to stay with his uncle Eugene, a priest and 27 years old. William cherished his fond memories of staying with his uncle, and years later, Bouguereau would write about the happiness of family, the life that he had experienced, which was revealed to him. Living with his uncle, Bouguereau said in one journal that I had finally felt the love or simple affection that was missing in my life. Eugene became his surrogate father and mentor, and he shared with young William his love of Latin and French literature. He encouraged him to develop an interest in the classical culture, in which the painter would carry on for the rest of his life. In 1839, Eugene decided to send his nephew to an art school in Pons, where William received his first lessons in drawing. Here are some of the drawings that Bouguereau had done when he was about 16 and 17 years old. In 1841, Theodore, Bouguereau's father, changed careers and moved to the oil trading business, where William, at 17, had to reluctantly move with his family in Bordeaux. That was the time the father decided to end his son's studies and help provide and work in the family business. William took care of the books and the business and later took on responsibilities for a small workshop next door. William was enticed by a friend to take painting classes at Bordeaux Municipal Art School, and he dreamed of taking the classes that were offered there. His father, Theo, finally agreed as long as his studies would not lead him into a risky art career. At the start, he was only able to attend morning classes from 6 to 8 a.m. Because he couldn't neglect his professional duties, his progress was so rapid that he won all the awards. Here's an excerpt from the local Bordeaux Gazette at the time Bouguereau was studying at the school in Bordeaux. William Bouguereau marked his debut in the profession by being the cause of a riot in the art school in Bordeaux, which was precipitated by his winning the first prize and first year he was there. The student body even carried their hostilities so far as to present a formal but vain protest to the faculty against presenting Bouguereau with the prizes. He had begun his life there as a clerk in a business establishment, and that brought him to the contempt of his fellow pupils. Their chagrin at his success was followed by a jealous rage for which for a few days periodically broke up the school. The center of the art world was not in Bordeaux, but in Paris. However, Bouguereau's father could not afford to send his son to Paris. His mother made money by her needlework, but that wasn't enough. His uncle Eugene stepped in, where he arranged to have Bouguereau paint the portraits of the parishioners at a fixed price in exchange for room and board. 33 portraits helped him save 900 francs, and his aunt matched the sum, which afforded him to study in Paris at the age of 21. In April, he was enrolled in the École des Beaux-Arts. Amazingly, he was almost not accepted. He was 99th out of 100. The young student was very eager to be seen in a favorable light, and he regularly ranked to be one of the best in the school. Consequently, in 1850, he won the competition for the Prix de Rome. This was the tradition where the winning student would be sent to Rome for 4 years to study at the Villa Medici, the seat of the French Academy in Italy, where the techniques of the classical and Renaissance masters such as Michelangelo were taught and where Bouguereau perfected. This is from the Medici transcripts. It tells us what was taught there. This art training system is oriented to the past, for no other artist since the Renaissance has ever achieved the level of perfection reached by Raphael or Michelangelo. It is your duty as a student, your obligation, your responsibility as a contemporary artist to embody the past into the present and carry that tradition into the future. Working at the Villa Medici was basically Bouguereau's college education. While there, he took this opportunity and traveled extensively throughout Italy and painted the beautiful countryside. He copied many of the Italian Renaissance masterpieces. He visited towns and lakes where these great artists lived and painted, and the influences from this period are very apparent in the works he started creating around this point. His talent was so great that from this point on, Bouguereau became one of the young painters that all of Paris and Italy were talking about. This was written in the newspapers about Bouguereau. The craft of picture making as practiced by Bouguereau basically follows the principle of academic theory, the fundamental idea whereby painting can be judged logically and objectively by its conformity to ideas established for its divisible parts, which were to be determined by composition, drawing, color harmony, and expression. The method Bouguereau used to execute his important paintings provide ample opportunities for the study and resolution of problems that might arise in each of these areas. He perfected each separate step leading to the genesis of a painting. The career of William Bouguereau, unlike many of his contemporaries, then the avant-garde impressionists, was one of ever-increasing success without setback. He returned to Paris in 1854. He regularly exhibited at the Salon. He was awarded many commissions for portraits and decorative series that he created. His work was very popular by the public and the critics. In 1856, he married Nellie. They had their first child, Henrietta, 1 year later on Christmas Day, and the same year, the Salon, at 1857, bestowed the Medal of Honor on a 32-year-old Bouguereau. He won countless awards, and he soon began working for the emperor. As a result of his success, he had asked his friend and pupil, Jean-Louis Pascal, to draw up plans for a home and studio he wanted to build on a plot of land he had purchased. He was earning a considerable amount of money and now was building his own home. Now, in 1868, because of his great success, he was able to move his family and his mother into this new house in time for the birth of their fourth child, Paul. It was this time forward that his greatest body of work began, along with the style and subjects for which he was most revered and well known. Throughout his career, he gained much official public recognition. He was the most powerful and wealthiest painter in France at the time. His imperial commission, which was a first-class Salon medal, was awarded to him. He was made Chevalier, a knight. He was awarded the Legion of Honor in 1876 at age 51. He was, at the same time, made one of only 40 lifetime members of the École des Beaux-Arts, which is one of the highest official honors awarded at the time. In 1885, he was awarded the Grand Medal of Honor, and the Salon made him Commander of Legion of Honor the same year, making him one of the highest officials in the art school. International recognition was forthcoming, and in 1862, he was named honorary member of the Belgian Society of Artists. In 1866, he became a member of the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Holland. There's one book written about him which lists the first 10 pages showing nothing but his awards. Bouguereau was also highly respected as a teacher, and in 1881, he was elected president of the painting section of the Paris Salon. And in 1883, he became the president of the Benevolent Society of Painters, Architects, Sculptors, Engravers, and Designers, which promoted and attended to the welfare of new and struggling artists. He became the president of the École des Beaux-Arts. He also taught independent painting classes at the Académie Julian. His personal life, however, wasn't as joyful. His wife Nellie gave birth to their third child, Maurice, after losing their second child. But their joy was short-lived, and in April 1877, his beloved wife Nellie died of complications from her fourth and very difficult pregnancy, and in June of the same year, the third baby died. Here is a painting of his third child, Bouguereau created during what would have been a very difficult time for him. Here we see, so beautifully rendered, his baby in the arms of his wife, Nell. As a result of his immense sadness, he lost himself in his work. He said, "I am only happy when I'm painting." He sat in the corner of a garden measuring some 200 feet. I arranged my outdoor studio. And in the orangerie, I set up my interior studio at 6 in the morning, rain or shine, drizzle or wind. Escorted by 3 dogs and a servant, I set out for a 2-hour walk through the fields or along the seashore. Once home, I have a cup of tea, settle down to work. At 11, the family gathers for lunch, and at 1, I resume work with my models and continue to 6 o'clock in the evening, with few short breaks. Then he would pick up his rustic cane and soft felt hat. With a cigarette between his lips, he would walk around the harbor and watch the sunset into the sea. He said, "When the town clocks chime 7, I go home for dinner. At 10 o'clock, it's curfew." He would receive guests, he would smoke and chat, but he would never stop painting. As soon as the light became insufficient for painting, he would work on his luminous correspondence. Then finally, I would let my imagination wander. I would search for new subject, designing new compositions by lamplight, stopping only when weariness got the best of me. He had the reputation of having the best models in Paris, and he made the best use of them. This is an article on Bouguereau's models. Bouguereau's Italian model women are instructed to bring their infant offspring or their tiny brothers and sisters. Once in the studio, the little humans are undressed and are allowed to roll around the floor, to play, to quarrel, to wail in lamentation. They dirty up the room a great deal. They are neither savory or aristocratic or angelic, but out of them the artist makes his capital. With sketchbook in hand, he records their movements as they tumble on the floor. He draws the curves and the turns of their bodies. He counts the creases of fat on their plump little thighs, as Audubon counted the scales on the legs of a hummingbird. The extent he studied his models and the work that went into preparation of the finely modeled flesh tones led many critics to accuse Bouguereau on relying heavily on technique. This was also written about his work. This impeccable painting in which everything was depicted with the utmost care, where the slightest detail was lovingly rendered, was not easily achieved. The material execution was confident and rapid, but the preparations were lengthy and carefully thought out, each subject being weighed and looked at every which way, with the help of studies, full drawings, and numerous painted sketches. The Impressionists and the modern artists felt this was a waste of time. When asked by a journalist if he was insulted by the fact that other artists criticized and mocked him, he replied, "My work is beyond their comprehension, and I can simply not see what they see." As a result, he painted this picture, the wasp's nest, to fuel their differences. Bouguereau had a keen fondness for satirical symbolism, which he writes, "The shapely but vacuous central figure is defined as the official embodiment of contemporary art being jousted, pricked, and shot out from behind from the younger generation of painters," which was Bouguereau's way of mocking them. By the end of 1877, he began to mention to his family his interest in one of his students, Elizabeth Jane Gardner, an American from New Hampshire, 12 years his junior, and she had settled in Paris. William was now 52 years old, and remember, Nellie had passed away many years earlier. After graduating from LaSalle College with a degree in art, Elizabeth taught for a while and then became instrumental in founding the School of Design in Worcester, Massachusetts. It was then that she awakened to the realization that the foundation of good painting is correct drawing, and at the time, Paris was the mecca for American and European artists to learn how to draw. So Elizabeth was determined to go there. Soon after the Civil War, she and a teacher friend set out for France. It never occurred to her, she said in later years, that she would have any trouble being accepted as a student, and she quickly found out that the Parisian schools were not accepting women. Here's an excerpt from the Boston transcripts of her experience. It said, "Only the men were admitted into any art school in Paris when Elizabeth Gardner came to Paris from Exeter, New Hampshire to study. With her New England character, she decided that she must have the benefit of such teaching. Since she could not gain admittance as a woman, she had a daring idea that she would put on boys' clothes and cut her hair, so that she entered the Académie Julian as a boy. Monsieur Bouguereau was, of course, one of the masters who would critique her work. The article states he liked her work and she improved very rapidly under his teaching. He became much interested in her development and was so kind and so helpful that she finally confessed her secret, that she was not a boy but a young woman from America. And she told him how she longed to study painting and found all the doors closed to women at the time. She was obligated to resort to this lie because women simply were not admitted into classes. It was said that Bouguereau's sense of justice was aroused. He took up a cause for women artists and battled valiantly until he succeeded to opening the doors of the Académie Julian to women. Elizabeth Jane Gardner was the first name to enroll there. These are her paintings. Her professor, William Adolphe Bouguereau, was a widower and lived with his daughter and mother, who lived across the courtyard in a studio apartment, and it wasn't long before the teacher and pupil were deeply in love. But his daughter Henrietta, who was now 20, and more particularly his mother, was so opposed to the idea, he was not allowed to speak of it. In fact, his mother made him swear not to think of remarrying before her own death. Henrietta threatened to join a convent if the subject ever came up. He kept his promise, and he and Elizabeth were secretly engaged in 1879. Bouguereau's mother felt that having two painters in the house would be too much for domestic happiness. In February of 1896, his mother died at 94. William and Elizabeth were finally married after a 17-year engagement. He was 71 and she was 59. They had 10 years together before his death. At their wedding, she wore a wedding gown of black and white because she was in mourning for his mother, but also a bride. They went to Rome on their honeymoon, and because of his fame, they were treated like royalty. Elizabeth was from New Hampshire, but they married in his home parish. He was 71 and couldn't undertake a lengthy trip to the States, so she decided to put her own career on hold as an artist and dedicated her life to her husband. She was very devoted to him, always by his side, acting as secretary for the correspondences, papers, and speeches that he had. In 1899, his son Paul, who was a lawyer now, a well-regarded member of the Paris bar, and an officer of the military reserve, contracted tuberculosis and died in the arms of his father. Bouguereau was forced to suffer the tragedy and witnessing 4 of his 5 children dying before him. The heaviest of all the burdens, all the power, fame, fortune could not alleviate that for him. By this time, he was worn out by his duties and many assignments. The loss of Paul was a severe blow to him, psychologically, physically, as well as to his spirit, and he began to age rapidly. His days seemed to weigh upon him like never before. Moreover, he had combined all of his hard work and his life as a bon vivant, who loved to eat, drink, and smoke very heartily. But worst of all, he was a chain smoker, and in spite of his robust constitution, he began to have serious health concerns after Paul's death. But there were also happy moments. He was asked to represent 2 paintings for the Paris World's Fair. In his family life, his grandson William was accepted in a prestigious college, which was a source of great pride for Bouguereau. In 1903, he was made the Grand Officer of the Legion of Honor. He was invited to Rome to participate in the centennial of the Villa Medici, and after the celebration, he and Elizabeth spent some time in Florence. In the initial years of the 20th century, he had a number of invitations to celebrate him being the master in Europe. However, due to his rapid deterioration in health, Elizabeth had to decline them. She cared for him and indulged him. It was a burden for him even to walk, and by the end of 1903, it was difficult for him to hold a pencil or a brush. If he wasn't suffering enough from his heart disease, it was aggravated by a burglary of his house, and all his paintings were stolen or destroyed. On the 19th of August, 1905, shortly after the break-in, the great master, William Bouguereau, passed away quietly in his house. Surrounded by his family, there was a death notice written in the New York Times. He was such a truly significant man who is not in our history books. You will not find him there. Although he was awarded the highest honors in France, and because of his hard work, was ridiculed and banished from museums and official art circles for close to 90 years after his death. To put this moment in time in perspective, in 1905, the year Bouguereau's death, a 25-year-old Pablo Picasso was making his ascent into the pinnacle of the art world, where he was living in an art district in Montmartre in Paris. He would emerge into the art world with this painting. Ironically, this painting was called the detonator of the modern art movement, the cornerstone of 20th century art. With this painting, the century-old traditions, which had been perfected by Bouguereau, were set aside as relics of the past. This is what the art critics were saying about his work. Picasso, at the height of his career, said, "Perhaps more than any other painter, Bouguereau believed that art was supposed to preserve old traditions and not create new ones. His canvases of calm, idealized, timeless peasants used the lessons of the Italian Renaissance, balance, linear perspective, realistic, three-dimensional modeling, and then incorporated them into scenes that satisfied contemporary bourgeois taste. No greater defender of the status quo in art ever existed, and no finer technician in oil paint ever put brush to canvas. But his time is over, a new master is born." The beginnings of Bouguereau's reappreciation can be traced back to about 1988, when his prices quadrupled in that year. It was further capitulated by a retrospective show in 1984 to 1985, the same show of which the first book of Bouguereau's work, was available to the public. As mentioned earlier, the Metropolitan Museum permanently hung two of his major works, which they had in storage since the beginning of the 20th century. Since 1990, his prices have literally exploded, doubling on average every 3 years. In 1960, his works were selling for $500 to $6,500. They've accelerated over the past several years. Auction houses have reported that the prices of his work have been repeatedly broken. In 1998, Heart's Awakening sold for $4.2 million at Christie's in New York. In 1999, Cupid and Psyche, which most of you have seen before, sold for $7.2 million. And that sale was surpassed the very next week with this painting, Alma Perrins, owned by one of the biggest collectors, Sylvester Stallone. He sold it for $6.3 million. That record only lasted 1 year when he purchased Charity for $45 million. Within the last 15 years, his paintings have been taken out of their crates, basements, and attics and have been dusted off and professionally cleaned, and now in over 100 museums across the country.
Okay. Whoop. Okay. All right. So what'd you guys think of that?
Very impressive. Yeah, very impressive. First of all, I'd like to thank you for many years ago taking the class to the Booth Western Museum in Cartersville, where I had the opportunity to meet Everett Raymond Kinsler, who was a portrait artist who painted over 2,000 portraits. So I would say that he probably was a classical painter, but he also did the graphic arts and illustrationist too before. So that gave me a great appreciation, meeting an individual like that with a kind of life that he had, for what this young man was saying about William. I can't pronounce his last name, but William. So, but there was, I appreciated things that he said about how he did the glazing technique, because you were trying to show us that many times. And I remember when I did the first one and I wasn't satisfied with it. My granddaughter loves it, but I'm still not satisfied with that one piece. So clearly that is something that you might need to, I need to maybe visit again. And I love all the descriptive words that he used to describe this artist's work and him as an individual. I know there's a lot of things we probably don't agree with, but I do also realize that some of the works that he did paint, he was painting, the subjects were those of that particular century or of time that he was born in and what was available to him, and that was his environment and his world. So, but the objects that he painted himself, he painted, and in painting was a very striking, and I really liked his work in that human and realism feeling came out, because I think by now we all have kind of, if we've been dabbling for a couple of years or so, we all kind of now understand what kind of artists we aspire to be, or what we like doing best. So, and I love that traditional kind of realism and trying to capture the feelings of the person and the individual, so that you don't have to try to think and guess whether this is a person or if this is just a box with some eyes in it and stuff like that. While I appreciate many varieties of art, I like to start with the human figure, because that is where all art stems from. Because we as humans, and then we see the world around us that is lines and boxes and things like that, that you can make art and abstract things like that from also. But I really, I'm not so upset with myself that it takes so long for me to do something. When I'm painting a person, a portrait, I'm not going to finish it in a day or two. It's going to take whatever time it's going to be necessary for me to connect with what I'm trying to paint and be able to put that that kind of life feeling and my feeling and expressions with them on a canvas. So I really enjoyed this particular video. I probably will go back and review it again, and I won't say anything else. I'll allow some of the other students to have something to say before all our time is up.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
It was a shame that the art community of may still happens is so jealous of one another that they can't let two schools of art exist at the same time or be so critical about it. I mean, that's seems to me selfish on their parts.
Mhm. Agree. Agree.
But you
I
know,
love
it's art dealers.
I loved what they said, that his paintings were like windows in frozen moments of time. That's how realistic they were to me. And at the beginning of the video, I was worried that Mr. Bouguereau would never have been able to come out of the criticism that he received from the avant-garde movement. But I think maybe one of the points of this man's video was to show us that the beauty of his work, the draftsmanship and the quality of his work has now been re-recognized by another whole set of people, and the value has returned. And speaking to Bob's comment, I think that much of art is tied to what's quote unquote fashionable at a certain time. And I agree with him too that it's too bad that they couldn't exist side to side. But I guess that Picasso and his group had to go through rebellion to do something new. But it's just unfortunate that people were hurt in the process.
Okay. So let me kind of respond to some of what you guys have been saying. In response to Bob, the simple answer is, if there's money involved,
Yes. Well, yes.
that drives everything.
Yep, you're right.
And so, as he pointed out, the young man who was doing this, not such a young man anymore, by the way, he, the art dealers, saw an opportunity.
Mm. Mm.
And the difference in trying to represent an artist like Bouguereau, who only did maybe 15 or 20 paintings a year, versus somebody like Monet or Degas or Picasso, who could crank out hundreds of paintings a year, there was more opportunity there. And so they were very happy to shift their focus onto a more modern art movement because they saw an opportunity to become more wealthy, frankly. And, that's what drove a lot of that. And the fact is that a lot of those academic artists, painting in the salon, they didn't really use gallery owners and art dealers, because a lot of their commissions were directly from their patrons, who were very wealthy, who didn't go through art dealers. They would work with the artists directly because they had the money to do it. And that's really who a lot of the people in the salon, that was their focus. They didn't want to sell paintings in a gallery. That was not their business. They were painting historical and monumental paintings, which took longer, you know, for sure, and had a very specific purpose and use. You know, if you go back and you really look at Bouguereau's paintings, he did quite a few paintings during his lifetime, but I would say that probably 70 to 80% of those, the public never saw, you know, because they went directly to the person commissioning it, you know? So it wasn't something that they were going to put out, you know, and hang in a gallery to try to sell. It was already paid for. And that's how they financed their life, you know, was by doing commission work, you know? So it was already, you know, there was a place for it. And they would do it at a size and a scale that would be appropriate to the place that it was going to be put in. You know, and also, and we've talked about this before, you had a lot of different things going on, you know, around that period of time, particularly in that transition from the 1800s into the 1900s. You know, shortly after 1900, you had the First World War, right? And that certainly affected society. And a lot of those academic artists in Paris and France, you know, they had either, you know, been killed off or died, you know, during that period of time. You know, and a lot of the younger avant-garde artists had left Europe and moved to the United States, and particularly right around World War II there. And then what did they do? You know, when they got here, they were looking for work. Well, a lot of them became professors, you know, heads of art departments and things at a lot of American universities and schools. And what do you think that they were going to push? Were they going to push academic art, you know, and traditional values? No. You know, they were going to push, you know, modern art, and that's what they did. And that's why we have, well, basically, you know, we have a whole generation of artists who couldn't draw their way out of a paper bag if their life depended on it, unfortunately. But it has begun to go back the other way. And academic training is now seen as something that's valuable. And learning how to draw is, again, it's a valuable skill. Understanding color and value and composition, you know, again, all valuable skills again. So there, you know, there's a rebirth, you know, of, you know, more traditional and academic approaches. And it will be interesting to see what happens in the next 50 to 100 years, you know, as a society, you know, we live with both of these ideals, you know, modernism as well as, you know, the traditional values and skills. So we'll see. Anyway.
You know, it happens so often, though. It's always out with the old and in with the new.
Yeah.
Well, and that has been going on for a long time, John.
Yes, that's the mentality, right?
I mean, that happens, you know, every couple of generations. But, you know, the fact is, I think we may be at a point in time in history now where, and, you know, with the advent of the internet and being able to share information and people having access, you know, to be able to see so much more than they used to see in a lifetime, that we might find a balance. You know, we might find a balance in there.
That's true. That's
There is
possible.
an old slogan that says, the old becomes new again, and that happens.
And that's right. That's true, too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, and that's pretty much so what is going on right now.
Right.
It's really been going on really since about the 1970s. And we've talked about this many times before, but, you know, in the early 1970s, there was sort of a regained interest in this country about you know, finding, you know, artists who could teach, you know, those classical methods of drawing and painting. And that's kind of where it came from. And since the 1970s, it's been building in this country. And right now, I would say it is probably the dominant direction that, you know, universities and art schools and ateliers are moving, is in, you know, teaching people those classical approaches to painting again. And it's good to see, you know, personally. I mean, it's just my view. But, you know, you all know what I do, so.
Charles, I have a question.
Yeah.
The man went into great detail, but I didn't understand the process of Bouguereau painting wet into wet and then scraping it and then doing something else to make the flesh tones and whatever it was he was painting look realistic. Would you tell us about that again, please?
Well, yeah, you would put down, this is going to get into a long conversation.
Okay. Whoops.
You have different stages of a classical painting, right? The first thing you have is you have your grisaille, right? Your underpainting, of which you're building up. It's a monotone painting in which you're building up all your values and building form, right? From there, then you go into what I commonly call a block out. And when you're doing this with a grisaille or an underpainting, you know, you're not working opaquely, you're working translucently or transparently. And you're putting in big blocks of translucent color over that underpainting. And you're building it up into what they call the dead paint stage, right? And then from there, you begin working in smaller areas and building up and really rendering form for your final, you know, passages of paint. And so you finish layers. So, you know, you've got different steps along the way in this process. And yeah, during that period of time, a lot of times painters like Bouguereau would put down a layer of paint and then cut back through it, you know, with a palette knife or, you know, different, the end of a brush or whatever, to scrape back through and let some of that underpainting show, creating what we call an open or a broken paint passage.
I really, thinking back, when you were teaching us how to do the glazing after we did the undercoating, that it was a very interesting technique. Some mastered it better than I did, but I did go and try it. And I still have the painting hanging today because I still got, it's to remind me of the technique that I used, that you taught us, and that to revisit it again, because that's a long process. And if you're going to do it right, you have to give it the proper attention. And that, even when you do that, you might not be satisfied with your work. But I can appreciate what he did, because, and why it took so long for him to produce a work of art, because, you know, it was special to make things right. You know?
Well, you know, just, you know, each of those phases, you know, doing the underpainting on the scale that he was working on,
Yes.
it could take several months working on that one painting to just finish the grisaille. So, you know, painters like Bouguereau would generally work on multiple paintings at once. You know, he never worked on just one thing. You know, he was always working on, you know, a whole series of pieces, because you would get to a certain stage, and as anybody who's worked with oil paint knows, at some point you have to stop and you got to let it set up and dry. You know, you can't just keep working on it. And so keep in mind too that he didn't have the advantage of a lot of the different mediums that we have today that help speed up the drying time in the oil. So he had to let that dry very slowly. Sometimes with those color passages, it literally took weeks or months, for that to totally dry before you could go back into it. So, it's a very long, very involved process.
Did he have to stop?
Go ahead,
Did he have to wait until it was completely dry before he started glazing?
Yes. Yeah, because if one of the problems that you have with oil paint is that if you go back and you put a wet layer over paint that's not fully dry but just has kind of a dry surface, that's where you begin to get fissuring and cracking, because those two different paint layers, that one underneath, is still soft underneath the paint and will still move. And as that layer over the top begins to dry and harden, because it's closer and in contact with heat and air, it forms a very brittle surface. And so that soft layer, if it begins to move, that's where you begin to see that, kind of cracking and fissuring in the paint. And so if you don't want that, which in modern painting, sometimes that can be a somewhat desirable effect. But if you want to guard against that and make an archivally sound painting that is going to last for a very long time, you really need to let those layers dry thoroughly. And the academic painters understood that, and they would do that.
I have a question then. I'm working on a painting that was dry, except I decided to change the background. And I used, because I thought it was going to be a rush job, I used liquid and just for the background. And now, since I did not have to rush as I thought I would, I'd like to change that background again. So the liquid speeds up the drying. So how long do I need to wait before I can put a regular coat of oil paint on top of that?
Well, it will depend on how thick the paint is. Is the paint fairly flat and fairly smooth, or is there a lot of texture in the paint?
It's fairly flat, fairly smooth.
Okay. Yeah, so probably I would say, a week or two, because liquid will speed up the drying time. And that's one of the things I was talking about. We have mediums today that will, accelerate the drying of that oil, so we can actually paint over those layers much faster than they could. So if you're using something like Galkyd, liquid, any of those mediums that really speed that drying time up, you can have a fairly bold passage of paint dry relatively quickly, within a couple of weeks, and then paint back over it pretty safely now.
Do I need to use liquid again if I paint back over it, or can I just use regular oil without the liquid?
I would, since you started using the liquid, I would go through that process all the way through the process with that same medium. I wouldn't change mediums.
Okay.
Because those different mediums, again, they will accelerate the drying, but will they accelerate it at the same speed?
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So, I think if you started off with a particular mixture or medium that you're putting into your oil paint, then you probably need to stay with that, all the way through the process.
Okay, thank you. And also, I missed part of most of the video, and I'd like to view it again. So, would you mind giving me the title of it, please?
Yeah, sure. It was William Bouguereau. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, it was just, yeah. It was presented by William Graf, Graf, and it's on YouTube, and it's just titled William Bouguereau, Bouguereau.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and there's got to be 20 or 30, different videos on Bouguereau and his work on YouTube. He's had, like Sargent and Bo, he's had a lot of attention paid to him really since about the 1970s, 1980s. People going back and really researching and looking at his work and his life, and it's really valuable, to learn about folks like him. So, okay.
But this particular one is by William Graf.
William Graf. Yeah, that's
Okay.
what you're looking for.
Okay,
And
thank you.
It's about an hour long. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to make a statement. I don't, no one has to comment on it or anything. But this biography that he gave us of this, of the artist, it let us know that it's really history, and we're making history today. But it showed that the problems that women have, and we've always had and still have today, the complications of pregnancy. His wife, they only married like 11 years, and she died from complications, and her baby did too, from childbirth. And it reminded me of my grandfather. That happened to his wife, and we never kept records of those things until like 1965. And then the other, where women were not allowed to go to school to get an education or of their choosing, so that the dominance of the other of the sex in the world and how they treated women, and that still lives today, but not so much in art school, but in many other sectors of our world and our economy. And also that he lost 5 children before he passed away. Mm-hmm. My grandfather lost like 3 or 4 children and his wife before he passed away. So what goes on with women and children is not held to high esteem so that they can get what they need to survive and prosper in this world. Mm-hmm. So I just like to say that I don't want anyone necessarily to say anything in that, but the biography showed us what's going on in history, and still, and the newspapers show us what's going on today. But we're still living history, and we as humans can do much, much better, both on each side.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Claudia got her moment on her soapbox too.
Well, I want to tell you where I come from. I used to be the president of the Commission on the Status of Women in Indiana. And so I come from a long range of fighting for women's rights when the newspapers didn't even allow, they advertised the jobs, women only, men only, where women were the rape victim, male police would take them in there, males would do everything, no woman was in the room with all of that kind of thing, and women can get credit. So I've been there, and so yeah, I'm very sensitive to those things that's going on in our society today that we have not eradicated, and women have not got equal. I was part of that group that did for the Equal Rights Amendment for women, so that we can have the same rights of jobs and success and work in our lives that men had. And it still to this day has not been ratified. And that was almost 40 years ago and has expired because we couldn't get enough states to ratify it in their state. And I tell you, yes, I'm come from that long line, fighting for myself and my daughters and my granddaughters. And of course, we won't go into the other parts of things that I fought for. But thank you for allowing me that minute on the stage. See what happens when I attend meetings? So I attend the class.
And that's perfectly fine. Yeah.
But in regard to the loss of children during that period, I've done some genealogy in my background, and my family comes from very poor farm Italian, southern Italy. And as I do the genealogy, it was amazing how many of the children didn't make it through childbirth or even the first year, and the women themselves going, and men had multiple wives, and children that didn't make it. I mean, it was just that era of time. I don't know if it was lack of medicines and attention to women, but it seemed like that late 1800s, early 1900s, and I saw in my family genealogy just a lot of that happening.
Well, I can relate to that on a personal note because, let's see, my mother has 4 children who survived. She had 2 who did not. And she herself almost didn't survive one of those pregnancies. And that was in the 1970s. And so, that there's more medical technology and things available now, but childbirth, it's a risky proposition even today. There's still a lot of women who don't make it through a pregnancy. So unfortunately it's been part of life for a very long time.
Yes.
But
My husband's mother died when he was 2 years old and 2 months after she had a baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and she just shouldn't have had a baby, period, after that first baby.
Right. Yeah.
The science.
Yeah. That's one of the unfortunate things in life is that, there's no guarantees, whether you're young or whether you're old, whether you're going to get up the next day and, be here or not. So anyway.
And he was raised by an evil stepmother that affected his life forever. So, I mean, everybody don't love your baby.
It's true too.
That's true.
That's true.
Yeah, we could go
on with that, I know.
We could go so many different directions from there.
I know.
But we won't. Okay. Okay, so getting back on track, with talking about art. Okay, I've got, I think we have time, maybe just for one more short video. Okay, so let me share this with you. And let's see. I was going to get into, muddy color and all that fun stuff. But I think I'm going to go to, this video here, about painting trees, because somebody requested this self-mineral such information, and so it would be worthwhile. Pardon me.
I will say this: push your colors a little bit more. Try to experiment with just pushing. Go where you haven't gone before with your colors, because you got to know that there's about 4 or 5 components of light and shadow. I'm not sure if. And don't use white. Make your greens lighter instead. Hey, Plein Air painters, how's it going this week? Terry with Learn Plein Air here, and this week we're going to give you 3 or 4 of my very best tips and advice for painting trees. And I really think this is going to help you improve your tree painting skills. It really doesn't matter what kind of trees you're painting. Painting maple trees, palm trees, evergreen trees, bonsai trees, deciduous trees, coniferous trees, carnivorous trees, any kind of tree. This advice, these principles are really going to help you improve your tree painting skills impressionistically when painting en plein air. I don't really know my trees. You got me, but I think I know how to paint my trees. So let's find out if I do. Make sure too you stay tuned to the very end. I'm gonna give you a power tip. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with color. If you're having trouble with muddy colors or getting your colors to pop, you'll want to stay tuned for this power tip. It will be powerful. I promise. All right. We're in a beautiful place, about 40 minutes from my house, called Placerville, Colorado, in the southwest mountains of Colorado, and I'm down on the river here. I was going to paint on the river, and as you can see, it's not quite frozen over. I'm pretty daring and adventurous, but I think today I'm just going to pop up above the river. There are some nice trees and tree shadows along this river. It's mostly frozen. I could probably find a good spot, but I think I'm going to pop up on the banks of the river and catch another place today. 20 yards or so from the river. Millie's here with me today, and of course, I am going to show you. She can plein air paint. I've trained her. Anyway, let's look at our setup here. We've got the sled that came in handy today. I paint mostly these days on a chair if I can. I've got a bad back from the old hockey playing days. And then let's go ahead and just take a look at our setup here. So I've got a French box, Julian easel, some pallets with some oil paint. I've got my palette and my plein air setup facing into the sun so that my paints can be in shadow. You always want to do that when you're painting on plein air. Let's take a quick round on my paints. I hope you can see them. I've got titanium white, yellow ochre. I've got permanent rose, alizarin crimson, cad red, cad orange, cad yellow medium, cad yellow light. I've got phthalo green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and phthalo blue. I've got a lot of colors on my palette, but that's how I was trained. I like to have that variety. You can always paint with less. It's less expensive too. I always paint with artist grade and more expensive paints and a little bit better pigments, but I encourage all beginners to paint with cheaper oil paints and use lots of paint and experiment and not let cost get in the way of painting. I've got a 12 by 16 on plein air painting board. I might flip that around and make it 16 by 12 because we're painting that tree right there, so I'm probably going to change that. I've got my backpack with various things in it that I might need for a plein air painting trip. See my video on plein air setup in this, and you'll get a more in-depth view from studio to the field and back on how I do my plein air setup and everything you need to get going as a beginner plein air painter. The link is in the description. It's a free, private, unlisted video that you can't get unless you put in your email and join our community, which we would welcome you. My brushes, I use a variety of brushes. At the beginning, again, I would experiment with cheaper brushes. And then once you get better or have more money, you can start paying more for your brushes. But I use a number 12 filbert mostly. Carry a couple of those in here. Number 8, number 6, some smaller filberts. And today we'll probably use this Robert Simmons Signet brush, I would imagine, with trees. I'm almost certain that I will. It's got some real thick, nice big bristles on it. Excellent for trees. I've got extra titanium white. Use a lot of white. And I use a cheaper oil painting brand, mostly Georgian. Sometimes I use Gamblin.
By the way, that last brush that he picked up, the Robert Simmons, it's shaped like a filbert, but it's not. It's called an Egbert because it's the extra long shaft of hair on it. Okay, so it's a lot more springy and sensitive. And I recommend those brushes if you haven't used them before. They're fun to play with.
My oil paints are Gamblin, but I also been trying this Winsor Newton Liquid Impasto. I like this stuff. You mix it in with your paint in the mid to latter stages of your painting, and it helps give you that buttery impasto look. My one complaint about this stuff is if you put too much out on your palette and you try to save it for the next time, it's unusable. I don't like that at all about that stuff. One last thing, I've got affiliate links below in the description to dickblick.com. That's where I order all my art materials. You can click on there at no extra cost to you and browse their inventory. Great prices, the best customer service, by far the best online way to order art materials. Okay, so here's a scene that I chose for our painting tutorial for how to on plein air paint trees. Some nice tree shadows in there. It's a beautiful tree. So I'm going to take you step by step on how I'm going to paint that tree. And I really, really believe this is going to help you. No matter what your painting style, no matter what kind of tree you're painting. All right, let's get going. Well, again, if you're new with us, welcome. And the first stage of my painting process on plein air, it's called the drawing stage. And it's where I put on a wash and then I draw with a brush. And I want to go over the 4 P's of my drawing stage with you if you're new. It's going to really help you. But my wash, I'm just going to put on a pure cad yellow wash today. The reason I put on a wash is to cover up the white canvas so that I can read my lighter values in particular more accurately. You know, I don't know, some painters are okay with having a white canvas, but I really like to cover up the canvas, get a neutral tone on there. so that I can read my colors better. And you can just use Turpenoid very lightly and put it in there and just cover it all up. You can use whatever color you want. Today I'm just using a bright yellow wash to kind of complement with the beautiful cools in the landscape today. And here's my 4 P's if you're new. Pieces, placement, proportion, and perspective. So I want to divide the complex landscape up into pieces. And since we're painting trees today, the tree is going to be one of those pieces, the main piece. Placement. I want to make sure that in my landscape painting, the tree and everything else is placed within its proper boundary. Everything has a boundary where it goes on the painting, so keep it there. Pieces, placement, proportion. I want to make sure that everything is proportionately sized the way it's supposed to be, accurately depicting the scene I'm painting. So the tree has to be the right size. You can take some artistic liberties, of course, but and then perspective. You want to be able to try to show perspective in your painting if you can. And if you have barn lines or road lines, today we have a little bit of tire tracks in the snow there. And so I can use those to show perspective in my painting. Then what we do is we draw with a brush, and I'm going to show you real quick how we do that. I'm going to put it in time lapse, and then we'll come back and talk about it real quick. Here we go.
Are you eating the right protein?
Okay, we're going to bypass the meat department right now, but look at all.
All right, we finished the drawing, and as you can see, I flipped my canvas back to a 16 by 12, a more higher format, so I can fit that tree in and just focus on the tree and make it a little bit more intimate painting. And in doing so, I have split my pieces into 3 different pieces in the landscape. So when you're painting trees, your trees are just a piece of the landscape. And so piece number 1 is going to be these 2 or 3 trees to my left right here in the foreground, immediate foreground that I'm focusing on right here. Piece number 2, there's some mountains, some foothills, rocks out there in the distance. It'll be a big piece. It'll serve as my background piece. And then piece number 3 will be all of this foreground snow right here and the shadows in it. Okay, and the other thing you want to do in the drawing stage, in addition to your pieces, is you want to signify where your darkest dark is going to be. For me, it's going to be these tree trunks and these trees right here to the left. So I just kind of briefly suggested how dark those were with a darker paint. And then also these kind of tracks in the snow. This little trail right here going back. We'll have some part of the darkest darks in it. And then shadows. Okay, so there's shadows here in the trees that we want to show. Shadows coming across the snow trail here that we want to show. And that will do it for your drawing stage. And then it's on to the next stage of tree painting, which is the abstract stage. Okay, so here we go. And hey, if you're new to this channel, would you consider subscribing right now, because you don't want to miss out on these en plein air, high mountain adventures we have every week. It's going to help you be a better painter. Going to help you de-stress and get more joy in your life and make beautiful paintings. Okay, let's just show you what I mixed up real quick here to get going. I mixed up a few tree colors, kind of a shadow, darker tree color here using ultramarine blue and cad yellow medium right here, and kind of a little more reddish mixture using some alizarin crimson over here with some ultramarine blue and phthalo blue in here for a cooler kind of tree trunk color. And I'll dip into probably some cerulean blue and put that in that mixture as well. It's a very, very cool blue color. You can see that. I know we're in shadow. So that makes a very cool purple color right there. And then I've got some lighter colors mixed up with the trees. The same I use to mix my yellows. You can do it a lot of different ways, but your greens, I mean, a lot of different ways. I used ultramarine blue, cad yellow medium, and a hint of cad red to just kind of gray it down a little bit in that mixture. And then some snow colors here for the back distant foothills, just to kind of get those in a little bit later probably. And using some ultramarine blue and some reds in this corner of the palette right here. Okay, so let's get going. Okay, I'm just going to get a few darkest darks in here, starting with the tree trunks of these beautiful, magnificent pines. We've got our Griswold family tree picked out. I like it, except we're not going to cut it down and put it in our living room and shove it through our window like he did. We're going to paint it. That'll be more fun. Oh, that was pretty funny. And then let's get into tip number 1 here when you're painting trees en plein air. And here we go. You want to take your trees through 3 or 4 steps to get them to look like impressionistic plein air trees. I've already given you some hints. You want to draw it out first, then you want to abstractly block it in, then you want to form it, and then you want to finish it. And so these are also kind of some of my stages that I teach in my plein air painting process. And so beginning, you just want to draw it out. And then secondly, you want to spend 80% of your tree painting time in what I call the abstract stage, where you're just trying to block in two-dimensional shapes, just flat shapes with the right color, the right value, and the right temperature. So that's what you're doing first. I'm using a big Robert Simmons brush to block these trees in. And I'm just going with the shadow portion of these first, using those mixtures that I told you about. But like I said, 80% is going to be in the abstract stage, just trying to find the right color, the right value, and the right temperature, and block it in the right piece. And then you want to form it. About 10% of your painting should be forming it. And I'll talk more about that. And about 5% should be your finish. And I'll tell you exactly the 2 or 3 things that you want to do to finish your painting when you're painting trees. So we'll go through it step by step. But let's just chill out, relax a little bit, and enjoy some painting as we go here. Beautiful day, sunny day. It's about 23 degrees, I think. A little chilly, but the sun kind of makes up for it here in Southwest Colorado. Let's just get a snow color in there. I've got a mixture of cerulean blue and some permanent rose, just to get a nice bright snow color. We got the shadow blocked in our tree, and then we'll do the light portion of the tree next. Dip into a little alizarin crimson into that tree trunk color, and just kind of want to make sure as I go along, and that gets covered up now and again, that I go back and keep that in there, because it's part of my darkest dark, and it's going to help me show space and depth in my painting. All right, so in the abstract stage, we're basically just blocking in two-dimensional shapes. No detail. Don't get any detail. Hold back. Tell your brain not to get detail-oriented. Keep it loose. Keep it impressionistic. Just work on getting your values and nailing your colors early on. And really try to hold back from describing something in too much depth and too much detail. It's hard to do as painters, I know. Let's see how impressionistic that is. My painting's not going to look like much. If you're new here, it won't look like much until we get to the end. And I do that on purpose. That's kind of my style. So I was trained in Russian Impressionism, and that's just how we do it. But if you're a realist, these principles will apply to you too. If you want to compare constantly one tree to another, one color to another, like colors to another, greens to greens, blues to blues, and then adjust them and ask yourself, in previous videos I've taught, ask yourself, should I make it lighter or darker, warmer or cooler? And then make your adjustments as you go, constantly comparing. Okay, let's just go ahead and briefly get the sky in there, just real quickly. I think it'll help me read all the other colors. I'm just using a big number 12 brush, and just going to use a mixture of cerulean blue. It's really a bluebird day out here in Colorado today, so the sky is very blue, but it's always going to have a hint of purple. So I added a bit of cadmium red and some titanium white. Sorry, the old easel's shaking and baking today. A lot of years on this old puppy. I think it's probably 15 years old, this easel. It's French box Julian easel. Let's get back to it. In the forming stage, what you want to do then is you want to start to look at the different planes within the pieces and describe the form in more detail. You pay attention to the subtle shifts in color, the subtle shifts in value and temperature of things. All right, so you want to make them become more like three-dimensional shapes, and you want to model them. You want to hear that word modeling out there as well. So that's kind of what you're doing in that stage. And then thirdly, in the finishing stage, there are 3 components to the finish of any painting, really, but especially with trees. You want to focus on your darkest dark. You want to make sure you have your lightest light, because that'll help things pop and contrast. And you want to finish off with any accents. You know, perhaps a flashy, brilliant brushstroke that you decide to add to the painting, wherever it may be. All right, so your darkest dark, lightest light, your accents. That's tip number 1. And there's some shadow right there beneath the tree that we want to describe. It's kind of a very bright purple color. So let's go with a color like that, right there. We'll describe that shadow a little more as we get into things. Really haven't left my Robert Simmons number 12 brush, just kind of sticking with it. I'm using it. And as you see stuff happen, try to grab it. Like, for example, I just see a nice contrast between two pieces. The piece right here in the background of that cliff and mountain, and then the sun shining on piece number one, the distant part of piece number one, the snow, because it's real nice. It's a nice thick paint. Just back in there. You know, I was talking to you in the opening about my chair. I don't know how many of you, if you have a bad back, throw it in the comments and let me know. But I've had chronic back pain for over 20 years now. I heard it originally playing professional hockey, weight training and playing professional hockey. And that's kind of really how I heard it. I've got degenerative disc disease in my lower back, and it's kind of humiliating. If you have it, you kind of know where I'm coming from here. It prevents you from doing a lot of things you'd want to do. You know, I mean, as an ex-pro athlete, you kind of think that forever you can kind of just do whatever you want to do and lift whatever you want to lift. But it's humbling because I got to ask my younger daughters and my wife sometimes to help me lift stuff and schlep my painting stuff to shows and stuff in the past. And it's not easy, but I don't let it stop me from doing what God put me here to do and what I love and what I'm passionate about, and that's plein air painting. We all have our little challenges. We all have our little thorns in our sides, and just wanted to kind of share that with you. And that's why I paint on a stool, just kind of take it a little bit easier on my back. Let's go on to tip number 2. And that has to do with the components of light and shadow. You got to know that there's about 4 or 5 components of light and shadow. I'm going to share a few of them with you right now as we paint trees. If you want to paint good trees, understand that there are these components to a tree. There's light, shadow, cast shadow. There's a core dark in the painting. There's a halftone in the trees, and there's a highlight in the trees. And I'll describe each of those as we go. Okay, right now I'm working on the light component of the tree, just with some quick impressionistic strokes, just where the light is hitting the tree. And, you know, you can use different strokes as you saw there. I'll use various strokes, like a thick stroke like that. I'll sometimes have the brush like this and just do little strokes like that show kind of the rounded needles. It's an evergreen tree. You can also take your brush, if you want to talk about strokes and brush strokes for trees, and to describe it a little bit more accurately, is I could start here with one, and then I could kind of do some rounded strokes like this to describe the roundness of the needles on the tree. And that's especially effective when there's snow on the trees. Right now there's not, but you can kind of describe the snow with brush strokes like that. It's kind of nice. And then a little more daring things to do like this, when you get a little more experience and you're not afraid, is you can kind of take your brush and go like that and just blend. You want to show some hard lines, some soft lines. I know that takes a little bit of experience to kind of do that. You might be scared to mess up your painting to do something like that. That takes a little bit of practice. So let's talk a little bit more now about those components of light and shadow. There are different things you need to pay attention to. So let's talk about the halftone. All right, the halftone is the actual color of the tree when it's not being washed out by the sun directly shining on it. And it's not the color of the shadow. It's, if you think of the tree as any kind of three-dimensional shape, it's going to have the dark side, it's going to have the halftone side, and it's going to have the light side. The sun is coming from here, from right to left. So this part of the tree is going to be washed out, you know? But in the middle part of the tree, I want to make sure I leave some brush strokes for the actual color and value of the tree that isn't being washed out by the sun. That's really called the halftone. And it's the kind of the green, evergreen color that you think of, you know, or at least that I'm seeing here in the tree. So I want brush strokes to include that color in there so that I more accurately describe the tree, and it's not just two colored, light and dark, you know, yellow and blue dark. So bring that color into the light like that so that it looks a little more realistic. Depending on where you live and what kind of tree you're painting, they're going to be different greens, but always look for that complementary color in the shadows. Okay, so I'm dipping into alizarin crimson, just pure alizarin crimson. I'm going to put it in my mixture. And the Impressionists were the first to figure out that there's always the opposing and complementary color in the shadows, and that'll be a red color. So don't be afraid to dip into your Cad Red, or your magenta, or your alizarin crimson, whatever you use, and just kind of throw that, just hints of that color in there to describe it. That's too brilliant and too bright right there. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go back into my dark color. I'm going to put some phthalo blue into some alizarin crimson. And I'm going to cover it up, but not completely. I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to leave it showing through because your eye can make more sense of it. Let's keep going with our pieces here. Let's describe these other trees. Let's look at this oak tree in the distance. I've got some alizarin crimson. I'm going to put some cerulean blue in. It's not quite as dark in value as these other trees. I want to be careful not to make it too dark. I think it could go a little darker. I'm going to creep up on it. A little more permanent rose in there. A little more orange to gray it down. But a little darker value. That's pretty close. I can go darker still. So I'm going to go into ultramarine blue. Just put it in that pile. It's kind of a gray purple mixture. There's a nice tree right there. Just let that happen. You know, another thing you can do with trees is use your palette knife. I would highly recommend you practice with a palette knife and use it because you can do some beautiful effects with trees with a palette knife. And it takes a lot of practice, I think, but try it. It's fun. So I did a side stroke there for the tree trunk, just like that. And then for these tree branches coming off. See, that helps me show depth and space because this tree is darker than the sky. But when you're doing trees, don't forget about your palette knife, man. It's a nice little tool to have. You probably can't see that. Let me go from this angle here. Down. Do some branches are going to come down as well. Let me show you how easily you can just make a tree, okay? You don't have to overcomplicate it. We're talking about light and shadow right now, but I can do a tree in 4 or 5 strokes if you're talking about impressionism. So you can just go like this, watch. Voila, tree. Try sometimes to use what they call economy of brushstrokes. Try to describe things in as few of brushstrokes as you can. And sometimes give it a different look to your painting, a little more authentic, a little more impressionistic perhaps. Dipping into some red to kind of put here on the shadow side of the tree. You can come across like this, and you can kind of scoop and do a little side scoop stroke. You can do a downward stroke. Let's talk about the highlight. And so on these trees here, there's a really strong highlight. The sun shining directly and brilliantly into the trees. So I'm going to go into titanium white, cad yellow, cad orange, cad yellow light, a really expensive cool green color. Dip into some of my medium. Okay, I get a big old scoop of paint on there. Let's try to describe the light part of the tree. The light's coming in there. See a little more green in there. So I'm going to add a little ultramarine blue or some phthalo green might do it. Sun on the trees. It's just direct washout color that comes in on the tree directly from being in the sun. So again, working on the Griswold family Christmas tree here is, I don't want to lose that tree trunk either, because that describes what I'm painting.
Trying to get to a point where we can skip this.
And other valuable investment information. Before you invest, investor.gov.
There we go.
We'll keep that in there. In front of the trees is more of a detail finish move, but I'll show you right now real quick. There's some tree branches that can contrast nicely in the woods here coming out. But you can kind of just briefly show contrast and just show some light and dark there in the trees. All right, so let's talk about the core dark. So we talked about light, shadow, cast shadows, halftone, highlight, and the core dark. So these are all elements of light and shadow. The core dark is the part of the tree where no light gets in. And don't make it black. So Try not to muddy or blacken up your colors, even though it might look like it. Search for colors that are actually there. I've been telling you to search for blues. I'm going to dip in a cobalt blue. Another very expensive blue color. And show that core dark. It's the part of the tree where no light gets in. And it will really help you describe your tree colors more accurately. And then what we can do, let's go back to the highlight part of the tree. Okay, I can dip into pure, I'm gonna dip into pure cad yellow. I'm gonna kind of put it in my green mixture. I'm gonna go cad yellow light. I'm gonna get a big old glob on the brush like that. And then save your strongest highlight colors for last. And just put hints of them on there to just show the brilliance of that highlight in the sun. And just use pure paint. Don't mix a medium with it. Just pure paint like that. Okay, and over here in our Big Daddy, we can do the same thing. I'm just seeing some more orange in there, so I'm gonna include that color. In the highlights. If it's too brilliant and too strong, I can cover it up, but I will say this, push your colors a little bit more. Try to experiment with just pushing. Go where you haven't gone before with your colors, because you can always dial them back. I can cover that up in a heartbeat. But what if I loved it? What if it added to my painting? What if it made you a better painter? Made people say, wow, look at your colors, I love your colors. Don't be afraid to be bold. Be adventurous, courageous, do something different. Paint with emotion, paint with passion, paint what you see, paint what drew you to the scenery. I'm gonna go back into that, and I'm gonna go and just put a little more cad yellow, medium and light. A little more bright highlight green color, and put it on top of that, and let's just see what we find. I'm gonna go quick. Try not to cover it all up, but leave that in there. Okay, I like that. Let's take our other brush. And another thing I can do as a tree technique is, if you're an impressionist, is kind of a back and forth stroke. So you can go like this, and then go like that with the other side of the brush. It's another just technique that you can try. See if you like that. A little bit of blending. Don't be afraid, just try it. I'm really forming right now and describing the tree a little bit more with the changes in the planes and the gradients. Kind of what I'm doing now. Let's go back to this tree. I'm going to dip into some yellow ochre, a bit of titanium white, cad yellow light, cad yellow medium, whatever you want to do. And then we'll just describe the light hitting those branches with some thick impressionistic strokes like that. Like that. Okay, and then back here, as the light changes in that shadow portion, there's a nice contrasting trees that are catching some light that I think will help describe this piece a little bit nicer. All right, before we move into tip number 3 here, let's kind of take a zoom in on the palette and see what we got going here. These are all my mixtures. I like to put my colors beside each other. The tree colors here, the snow colors here, these highlights on the trees that we did right there. Push some colors aside because we're going to get some new colors going here and just make a little bit more room. But I want to keep those colors there so that they're kind of like my roadmap, you know? So I don't want to get rid of them, but I'm going to make a little bit more room. Let's kind of show you some color mixing here. The snow is getting a lot more contrast in it with light and shadow. So I'm going to put a pile there and dip into a little bit of cad yellow medium right there for a highlight snow color. Maybe even a little bit of cad yellow light, a really cool, kind of bright yellow color. And then I was seeing the snow, you know, kind of a violet. It's got red in it, you know, so I'm going to go into some permanent rose and then a little cobalt blue right there. That's pretty close right there for kind of what I was seeing. I'm going to add a little titanium white. I'll scoop a little bit of that light color in there just to kind of get a warm, cool snow color. That's kind of a cool thing you can do. Take your light and mix it into the cool, and you got a warm cool that can give you a neat color. I'm really seeing that color out there. And then lastly, the shadows. Put a scoop of titanium white right there. So we've got 3 colors right beside each other. I'm gonna go into ultramarine blue. The shadows are really a blue-violet color. In fact, I'm gonna leave mostly ultramarine blue in there and just a hint of cad red, not much. I really want it to be a violet, pretty strong blue color, because that's what I'm seeing. I'm even gonna probably put a little bit more ultramarine blue in there and just make it stronger. Gonna go, like I said, err on the side of a little bit more power, a little bit more color, so I can always dial it back. So let's get back up on the canvas and see what we can do. Here we go. There's some tracks. I think we'll put that. That's kind of an artistic choice. Sometimes that can be neat, you know. Let's show our perspective. We talked about that in the opening. The tracks will be narrow here, and then to show perspective, they'll get a little wider. And the same with this beautiful tree right there. And then that one, I'm gonna dial it down a bit. I'm gonna try to show a little perspective and depth because this is it's further away. Again, you're always looking with trees, you know, always look for ways to create some contrast in your painting. Like I see a tree branch sticking out on the Griswold tree right here. It's very bright. I'm just gonna try it. It might mess it up, but I'm just gonna try it. I don't really care. You know, it's coming out like this. Tell me what you think. Did you like that or did you not like that? What's your opinion? You know how there's some dead tree branches and they catch light? I just think it's a better way to describe this tree. If you can just kind of pay attention to what's going on when you see that, don't be afraid to put it in. With thick paint on our Robert Simmons Signet brush, be careful you don't go over your shadow. Go in between the shadows like this. And then right here, take the side of your brush and just swoop it up into the snow like that, and then swoop it down. And just kind of go back and forth like that. There's some sun coming across the path like that. So let's just quickly take our brush and go into the shadow just really quickly like that. Don't be afraid, just do it. Do it quick, just do it like that. And then go the other way, like that, and then like that. It's how you paint with passion and emotion, and those kind of happy accidents make you look like a genius. You're like, oh wow, how'd you do that? Let's go on to tip number 3. Tip number 3, don't be a leaf counter. Okay, let me explain. You have to, if you're a beginner planer painter, this is all new to you, or you just started in the last few months, or the last couple of years, you have to change your mindset that you're painting a tree. You may have heard the term, pay what you see. Now, well, I was looking at my workshop notes that I took when I was a beginner painter early on. I'm just working on some highlights here, the highlight portion of the tree, and making them even stronger as we go along. But my notes said, I made a realization. I've been painting trees instead of shapes and pieces. And that was a key realization for me in my plein air journey, that I had been focused on trying to make it look like a tree, you know? And when you're painting trees like this, it's really crucial that you really have to fight your mind, because your brain wants to make sense of it and to detail it to death. But that will not help you in your plein air efforts. That will hurt you. You want to just be painting. You don't want to count every leaf. You want to just get the gesture of the tree. Remember how earlier I just described these trees with a few strokes? That's why I did that, so you could see that you can really describe a tree just by doing a few different directional strokes, and the mind's eye believes it. So you don't have to be a leaf counter. Try to get away from being a leaf counter. And I think your paintings will drastically improve. Put that in the comments, you know, tell me what you think about that or what you've learned. Other people need to hear about that. I think it's a key point. So go ahead and leave a comment there on that. By the way, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, we're going to be here every week for you, really trying to help you become a stronger plein air painter. We talked about lost and found edges in our last snow video. I'm going to do that right here. I'm going to get an edge going here. Some distant snow, I'm going to lose it, and then I'm going to find it. I'm going to lose it, and I'm going to find it again. I'm going to find it again. And that just kind of produces a nice little variety and interest back there.
Do not
solar panels. If you live in one of these 11 states of
Okay. Anybody got any thoughts about that?
Interesting. Of all the things that he said, the one that hit me, for me, is don't be a leaf counter.
Yeah, that's
And you know that, Charles, right?
yeah, that's actually some good advice. The thing I wanted you to get out of that whole video, and is Eloise here? Yes, she is. Okay.
Yes, she's here.
Yeah, remember the little demo I did, and I talked about, how the tree is. You got to think about it as being a shape and a form, right? And every shape and form, if you want it to be three-dimensional, you have to have 5 values, right? And those 5 values are shadow, light, mid-tone, core shadow, and reflected light. Okay? And it doesn't matter whether you're painting a face, an arm, a hand, a tree, a vase of flowers, that's always going to be true. You're going to need those 5 values on anything that's three-dimensional. Now, if you're painting the wall, then not so much, because the wall's a flat surface, and it will, depending on what the light's doing on it, it might be fairly even. But on a three-dimensional form, that's not going to happen, and you're always going to have those 5 values. So that was one of the things that he pointed out. He didn't describe it exactly that way, but but that's really what's happening there. Is
Also, what he did, if you noticed the size of the brushes, people get these itsy bitsy brushes and get so picky at it instead of blocking in the big stuff. And then
right,
he did the light with the same large brush.
Yeah. And he called that at first he called that a filbert, but it's not. That Robert Simmons brush is an Egbert. And that's one of those extra long, hair shafts. So the reason he was able to lay that paint down on a lot of other thick paint is because that particular brush has got a lot of spring to it. It's a very long shaft of hair, so you can, very delicately lay that brush down and pull paint off of it without digging through, all of your other paint layers. So, just keep that in mind. As you begin to build up more paint, you're going to need brushes that are, more flexible. You can't use a bright, to lay, lay paint on top of, like a thick paint passage. It's too stiff, so it's got to have some give in it. And so those Egberts are wonderful for that. For the blocking in, and getting in your big masses and shapes, your flats, your filberts, those are good for that. But, when you get into that, last part, or, when you're starting to layer, one color over another, I really like those Egberts a lot. They work very well for that. So that's just my own personal take on it. But anyhow. All right. So
say those 5 values again that you were referring to.
Okay, so again, you have shadow and light. Those are the 2 extremes. And so you always break a form into shadow side, light side, right? And then after that, then you find the mid-tone. That's on the light side, right? And then you find the core shadow. That's where light and shadow come together. And usually, for me, I always put in the reflected light last. And that's going to be on the shadow side. And so it's not quite as dark as the rest of the shadow. And it's certainly not anywhere close to as dark as the core shadow. So, Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
He also spoke of his 4 Ps, and I know one of them was placement,
Yeah.
portion, and perspective. I don't know what the other one was.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at that, you know. But yeah, proportion, placement, you know, perspective, if you can work perspective into it. And I'll try to find out what the other P was. Okay?
I got it. I wrote it
Got
down.
it?
You got it?
I think it was piece, placement, proportion, perspective.
Piece?
I'm not sure about that very first one. I was writing fast, but I have P-I-E-C-E, piece.
Huh. Oh, maybe pieces, yeah, or something.
Pieces, there you go.
Pieces, okay. And that was first, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then he broke it into 3 sections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are the pieces, yeah.
The pieces and the placement of the pieces.
Right.
Well,
And his perspective in that was because of the tracks that led around.
Right.
His perspective.
Yeah, something to pull your eye in.
Right.
So, Charles, I think he's very sophisticated. I think he's very talented. He's very experienced in mixing colors. And even though he went very fast, that was an excellent way to show us how to paint pictures. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it was good for trees.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, he does a lot of stuff that really kind of drives me crazy, you know.
I still think I'll be a little leaf counter a little bit. So,
And I know he was trying to move fast through there and all, but yeah, it's like, yeah, he's a little too energetic with those brush strokes, you know, sometimes, you know, it's just, I would call it haphazard, you know, myself, but, and not as deliberate as I would probably approach it. But again, you know, we're all different, so.
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
We saw the finished, I think that was the finished product. I don't think he was going to do anything else to that product. So if he was going to put that on the market to sell, how much do you think that it would sell for? How much would it sell for?
You know, I have no idea, Claudia, you know. Yeah, I can't.
I mean, it took him about, I guess, a couple hours if that.
Yeah, but again, and we've had this conversation before. You know, you can have somebody who is very efficient as a painter and do a painting in 2 hours and get $80,000 for it, and you can have a painter who spend 6 months on a painting and get $600 for it. Okay, so you know the time isn't the factor. It's the kind of the reputation and the provenance of the artist. You know, like for example, would you rather hang a Pablo Picasso on your wall or some artist that you saw out painting by the side of the road?
Can I put them both on the wall? Share the wall?
No, you only got. You only
get one.
Yeah, you only have to pick one. So, you know.
Well, he did say it was.
If the artist on the side of the road was you, I would pick yours. Paint yours.
It could be on the side of the road selling Picassos.
You gotta watch those guys. You gotta watch those guys. If they're on the side of the road selling Picassos, they probably got a bunch of watches to sell you too.
And he's selling his own Picassos, not the real Picasso.
So anyway.
But he did say that he did the speed up video and explained what he was doing when they slowed it down. So it wasn't that precarious. It was he did it more slowly, I think, than in his approach than we think.
Well, I was watching him layer on that paint,
Yeah.
and he kind of attacks the canvas a little bit, you know, with those short, jerky kind of strokes. Yeah, that's what I was commenting about. It's you know, I've never had a lot of great success, you know, doing that.
I like that, Charles.
You like that, huh? Then go for
You
it.
know that I would like that.
Well, Charles, you paint more painterly, and he paints a little looser, and that's why those chunky strokes look different to you.
Yeah, he paints a lot looser than I do. Yeah.
I liked it.
Yeah, and again, you know, it's like to each their own. You know, that's fine. But yeah, I'm just commenting, saying, you know, for me, I would find that
Right.
difficult to control, you know, and get the effect that I would want.
I came in late. Whose funeral were you talking about?
Elon's.
Elon's.
What did he die of?
I think he had a stroke.
How old was he?
Oh, wow.
You know, Naomi, I don't have all the information.
Oh,
I think it was 81, 82.
oh, so he died suddenly.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, rather.
There's one good thing about that.
Yeah.
He didn't suffer.
Right.
Yeah, well, rather suddenly. I mean, in talking to his wife at the service, I guess he had gone into the hospital on Thursday. He was having some issues, and they sent him home. They could have done a very highly risky surgery, what she said, and he declined to do that. And
Right.
Oh, okay.
he finally died on Saturday.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
But that's really all the information I've got.
Thank you, Charles, for representing us there.
Yes.
I would like to just let the class know that if you did not watch Sunday mornings on CBS yesterday morning, you might want to try to take a look at some of the episodes. And one of the episodes was about 3 brothers that were all painters, and they painted and won many prizes for painting birds. They all were bird painters. Their father, their mother was a painter, and their father, I think he was a writer or something like that. But all 3 brothers were painting. They painted some beautiful, beautiful birds. And there was one other episode in there also pertaining to painting. I can't quite remember what that was, but it was about the Red Room and stuff. So, but just check out some of the episodes that deal with painting that aired yesterday on CBS, which was very nice.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that.
It's a great program.
Yeah, that's
Sunday morning program.
yeah.
Yes.
That's actually my very favorite program out of, you know, everything on TV for many years. Unfortunately now, because I can't get like a lot of the local channels with good reception, and I'm on, cable. You know, I don't have cable with local channels, so I'm missing Sunday morning. I hope to correct that, you know, eventually.
Get an antenna. They say you can pick up local channels quite nicely with an antenna.
Yeah, I've tried that, and the fact is, yeah, it doesn't seem to work here.
Doesn't know.
No.
Can you get a hotspot? Can you get a hotspot?
Well, I've got internet. I've got cable.
Oh,
but
well, then you might be, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't. The package that we have does not have the local channels on it for cable.
Okay, but maybe you can get CBS on your cell phone. They have the streaming. They have
right
where you can get that download the app on your cell phone and you can get it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just try it.
Yeah, you got to.
On your cell phone today and go to CBS.
Okay. Yeah. Try that. Look at it at least. All right. So anybody else got anything else before we go away?
Well, I would like to ask you about Thursday. It's supposed to rain. When do you decide to cancel your plein air section?
Only when I'm,
You cancel
yeah, only when I'm sick.
this Thursday.
Yeah. Well,
Now you're breaking up, and I can't understand a word.
okay. Well, let me say a word. All right. As far as Thursday goes, we're
Right.
going to go to Lost Corner, right? And, you know, we always have the front porch that we can get under if it's raining. So,
Okay.
so
So rain or snow or shine, we're going, right?
we are going.
Okay. Well, I would like to join in, so I will tell you ahead of time that I'm coming, rain, snow, or shine.
Okay. And I'll make sure to bring your chair. Okay.
Thank you. And the table you had was very good.
Right.
You
Okay.
had a little small table. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. I'll bring those along then. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Send me some stuff, okay, for tomorrow. We have we have to have stuff to talk about. So if you've been doing something, send it, and we'll take a look at it. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you,
Good seeing
Charles.
Veronica.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Charles.
Bye,
Bye.
fellow students.
Oh.